both the growth that the NRA experienced during their tenure and then the Lapierre point about the sort of the political valence of this. I'm curious, how did the AG's team handle that during their closing argument? Because, as the professor pointed out last time in our podcast, the whole basis of this is supposed to be that the AG's office is bringing this on behalf of NRA members, right? It's supposed to be in their benefit. And as you said, there is this very clear, even though that's not exactly at issue in this case, there's this very clear sort of political valence to this. I'm curious how the AG's office tried to present their case when, one, the NRA as a whole is a party to this lawsuit, and at the same time, it's supposed to be for the benefit of NRA members. And she clearly has an axe to grind with the NRA, doesn't like what their political activities are. So how did they kind of wrap up their argument?
Yeah, on that last point, it's kind of funny because Wayne LaPierre's lawyer noted that, this case is supposed to be in the interest of NRA members, right? But she thinks the NRA is a terrorist organization. So that doesn't make, he's like, how does that make sense? Right. But the AG used the exact same line in there. The AG's lawyer, Letitia James wasn't there, which is something that Wayne's lawyer pointed out, that she never showed up to any of these trials, sort of questioning her priorities, that she didn't maybe think this case was as important. Obviously, she was doing the case that we did get a verdict in this week against Donald Trump, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the Trump speech, because they're sort of similarly situated events where she got this huge judgment against Donald Trump. And it seems at least very possible that she may get a sizable judgment against Wayne LaPierre and Woody Phillips as well once this jury comes back. But but her lawyer, obviously one of the assistant attorney generals, was arguing this case, and she brought up the exact same line about how, if this is a witch hunt, that the witch hunt accusation doesn't make sense because what they're doing is recovering money for the NRA. So you kind of get both angles of that in the closing arguments. On the one hand, you had Wayne's lawyer using it as like a attack on the prosecution generally, because she tried to shut down the organization, right? Which the judge denied, because that was her goal in the beginning, was to dissolve the NRA, which a lot of people had a lot of very valid concerns about. Shutting down a political opponent, a government official doing that is a very serious and potentially scary, right? Thing for a government official to do. Like, that's not how things operate in a free country outside of the most extreme circumstances.
Right.
Which, you could, it's the NRA. I think the valid point is that they did carry out their mission to a large extent. The question here is whether they could have done a better job of that if they hadn't had people stealing from them, essentially inside a lot of money along the way. And so that was one of the AG's defenses as well, was this essentially that it doesn't really matter that they were successful overall because they were basically stealing. That she used the metaphor of someone being caught with their hand in the cookie jar. This was a metaphor that she used at the beginning of her closing arguments. And she said, when someone's caught with their hand in the cookie jar, they're going to have all sorts of excuses. They're going to deflect. They're going to blame other people. They're going to say, I didn't take that many cookies. Why does it matter? They're going to make up all kinds of excuses, and then they'll admit that they did wrong, but that it wasn't that big of a deal, and that you shouldn't be paying attention anyway. They'll question you looking at them or looking into why they were taking the cookies. And so she kind of went through essentially summing up most of what the defendants were saying in sort of mocking it in her closing arguments, which came after the defendants. So she got to listen to all what they were saying. And then she basically was addressing this by comparing it to somebody who got their hand, got caught with crumbs on their face and their hand in the cookie jar. That's how she described it. And she also addressed similarly one of the main defenses that the NRA's lawyer got into was the idea that they have reformed, that they did have issues, that even, for instance, Wayne LaPierre was part of the problem, but that they had made a series of changes since these problems were brought to light. You know, they got rid of Ackerman McQueen. They sued Ackerman McQueen. Now they lost that case, but they had to pay Ackerman McQueen actually, but millions of dollars. But you know, the point was that that they made these reforms. They brought in a new CFO after Woody Phillips, who instituted a bunch of changes. Of course, they also moved on from him after he raised concerns about the bankruptcy filing that Wayne did of his own authority without telling the CFO beforehand. Who Craig Spray was the guy's name, and he got upset about that. And then shortly afterwards, Wayne said that they wanted to go in a different direction. Now they had a defense for this. They said he had health concerns, which he did. And that's why they wanted to go in a different direction. But the timing, obviously, of that was we'll see what the jury draws from it. But yeah, I mean, that was part of their big pitch, was that, yes, there were issues, but we fixed them. There's no need for further intervention from the government. You know, I think Wayne's lawyer compared this to self-defense, right? Like government intrusion was sort of part of the theme of his defense. You know, the government's coming in and attacking this man, Wayne LaPierre, and this organization that she doesn't like. And, you know, he's just trying to defend himself and the NRA, and bankruptcy was part of that whole defense. And yeah, you can see obviously so a lot went on.
Right.
But yeah, that I don't know. It's a pretty complicated case and closing arguments.
Well, I think that's important context, right? Because I think it's easy for an outside observer, maybe people that aren't following the nitty gritty too closely, to you'd be, NRA bad, so this, or NRA good, so this. But this actually deals with very arcane nonprofit law and corporate governance, and as you said, a multitude of defendants with individual allegations, and it's actually a very complex web. Sort of just to wrap up the trial aspect of this, give us an idea. You kind of alluded to it earlier, but an idea of when we might get a verdict in this case, and then sort of give us maybe your sense of having followed this trial very closely, just your overall sense of where the trial, you can if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to tell us how you think this is going to turn out, but just give us your overall sense after having now sat through the entire trial, just what this is going to look like at the end.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one thing from being there on Friday when the jury began deliberations is that it didn't seem to be going very well for them in terms of making a lot of progress. I mean, first of all, the sheet that they have to fill out is so it's I don't know. I've been on a jury before, but it was a criminal jury in Virginia, so I don't know how comparable it is to what they're going through. It's definitely different in some ways, because what the jury is tasked with doing in this case, they're basically tasked with being the fact finders, right? They're going to decide whether or not the allegations against the NRA are true and the defendants, and they meet the burden of proof and all that stuff. And there's a lot of different charges they have to go through on that front. And then they're going to decide what the damages should be, and they're going to offer the judge what they think should be damages. And it can, there's some of those sums I was talking about earlier, the tens of millions of dollars. Not only can they award those as repayments, but they can also award like a, punitive sort of damage. I don't think it's called punitive, but basically they can award double that too, which, I don't think Wayne LaPierre or Woody Phillips is worth anywhere near the kind of money that they could be on the hook for in this case, from my understanding of watching the proceedings. I'm sure Wayne has, he's not poor. He made $2 million a year for quite a while at the NRA. So I'm sure he has some money, but I don't think he has tens of millions of dollars to pay back to the NRA if it comes to that. he's already made $1 million payment as part of the idea that he's sort of done restitution, which was also like, part of the NRA defense. And I'll get into that in a second. But one of the things that makes me think they're going to take a while is it's just so much to go through, and they have to fill out the sheet that's like several pages long of, did this person do this? And if so, how much do you think they need to pay back? If anything, so they could also say zero in theory. But the other issue was when they went back to deliberate and they started making requests. Well, their first request was that they wanted all of the evidence in the case, which is like thousands of exhibits. So they didn't get that necessarily, because the judge, I think they wanted them to like kind of narrow down exactly what they wanted. Right. I mean, obviously, you're on the jury, you want as much information as you can get. Understandable. But I think the judge wanted them to kind of like, figure out exactly what kind of things you want to be sent in. And so they hadn't even gotten to that point where they sent back more specific requests by the end of Friday. So that's an indication that they're not moving very quickly necessarily. There was also apparently a jury, one of the jurors sort of expressed only, I think, about 2 hours into deliberations that they weren't moving very quickly and that they were kind of going around in circles on some point. So that's not necessarily a great sign that they're going to be done quickly.